Hey YouTube, what is happening? This is Casey with Casey and the boys. Before we get started, remember to, if you like the video, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Today we are going to talk about what if Luffy had any devil fruit in the series, aka what if somebody as creative as Luffy had each devil fruit and potentially were the main character of the story, so we had just as much exposure to them as we do Luffy. Since we see so much of Luffy, when we look at his devil fruit, we see that he is a rubber man. He ate the Gomu Nomi, and in a world where people control lightning, fire, light, and darkness itself, our main character was turned into rubber. It's not that exciting. It's not that cool. Now, his power isn't useless, though. He can stretch his limbs, and he can take punches like it's nothing. And he's also impervious to bullets, which is pretty sweet, actually. But compared to controlling the elements themselves and becoming those elements, rubber just doesn't seem OP or really even that powerful. But when you put it in the hands of somebody as creative and resourceful as Luffy, and the main character of our story, so we see him develop so much, we see this fruit reaching new heights and show potential that nobody would think was possible when they first thought of it turns you into rubber. Throughout the story, we've seen Luffy do simple things like use his body as a slingshot or as a balloon to take hits, but his creativity really comes out when he's using his gears. Gear second, where he uses the elasticity of his blood vessels to punt blood quickly through his body and basically blood doping, and it makes him incredibly fast and his punches hit a bit harder. Then gear third, where we throw logic and reality out of the window, as we do many times with One Piece, and he blows air into his bones to increase their size. Now, increasing their size apparently also increases, how much damage they're doing, it's apparently increasing the mass, but hey, he's able to unleash devastating attacks, and it's pretty sweet, so that's what matters. Then we have gear fourth. Again, similar to gear third, he's blowing air into his body, but he's actually coating his body in hockey and then blowing air into his muscles, optimizing on the elasticity of his body, and this gives him incredible control, allowing him to manipulate his body at will through use of his hockey, bending his punches in midair and directing them around like homing missiles, and actually being able to kick the ground so hard and so fast with his elasticized legs that he can freaking fly. And we have seen a ton of different forms of Gear 4th, and we're really only expecting to see more forms or more gears as this story progresses. But we've seen Bound Man, Snake Man, and Tank Man as the different forms, where really just focusing and optimizing different aspects of Luffy, whether that's his speed, overall fighting ability, or durability. With how Luffy uses this fruit, we see how such a simple fruit can be used so damn creatively. And I wonder what would happen if you took Luffy or somebody like him that could fully utilize each fruit in the world. What would happen? What kind of OP stuff would we get for this series? Let's start with not the Gomu. We basically did that, but let's go to the next one that we see. The Bara Bara Nomi. This fruit currently belongs to the great and powerful Buggy D Clown. This fruit, also known as the Chop Chop fruit, allows the user to break his body into pieces. It also automatically separates when somebody attempts to cut him, making him impervious to knife attacks and swords. The user can then control each piece of his detached body, freely allowing them to move those pieces of his body through the air. And Buggy uses this pretty creatively. He can set up traps for his opponents, and he attacks them in clever ways to catch them off guard. For instance, Buggy actually launches his full arm at somebody when he has a handful of knives to stab them, and they instinctively grab his wrist, but then he actually detaches said wrist and hand to continue the attack forward, taking his opponent by surprise. It's actually very clever and really just the start of the potential uses of this fruit. The user of the Bara Bara Nomi could also lay traps around the area in which they were fighting using their body parts, and they could try and catch their enemies by surprise by having, a severed hand that somebody had just cut off laying in wait. And once somebody thinks that they are at an advantage, potentially dropping their guard and losing the fight. And we actually see Buggy incorporate tactics similar to these. But once your opponent actually learns about your abilities, they can begin to predict your next attacks, and the element of surprise is gone. And that is a big weakness of this devil fruit, because once you know what's happening, there are a lot of holes and a lot of openings that really leave you to be taken down. Let's go through some of these weaknesses that Luffy and others have taken advantage of in the story. So one is that the control of your separated body parts actually has a range. And when they're outside of this range, the user loses control of those body parts. Also, separated body parts can be rounded up, collected, maybe bound like a bundle of sticks, and then you're stuck, unable to bring them back to you, unable to reconnect with them and form your full body. Also, the user, while they can control their limbs, send them flying around, and move them within this space, within this bubble, their feet actually have to remain kind of somewhat on the ground. They can actually be carried, but they can't fly around at the whim of the user. This also leaves their feet quite vulnerable. Even as they're dodging an attack, they cannot freely move their feet, and so their feet are vulnerable. In a larger example of this, Buggy had actually sent his entire upper body flying and trying to stab them. However, Luffy just walked up to his remaining lower half and kicked him in the groin, disabling Buggy. So clearly, the fruit has some weaknesses. Focusing on dismembered body parts takes a lot of focus and can leave other parts vulnerable. And these parts are vulnerable to damage, like Nico Robin's flower fruit. Now, what Luffy has done in the past, he has shown proficiency in two areas. One is being exceptionally creative with his devil fruit. He has pushed the fruit and the powers of the fruit themselves to a limit. The other thing he's done is he has actually incorporated haki not just into his body, but into his techniques themselves, covering his own weaknesses and making the strengths of his devil fruit stand out so much more. So now I want to talk about the Bara Bara Nomi and the kind of advantages that somebody would have with observation haki, armament haki, and really just taking this separation power to another level by itself, and then with haki itself. So immediately, observation haki. We already mentioned how you can lose track of what's going on around you and what's going on as you are trying to keep track of all your separated body parts. But if you have observation haki, then this becomes a lot less of an issue, where you still have to, you're still keeping track of a lot more than the other people on the battlefield. However, you don't have to see where your body parts are to know where they are. And you can respond and react much more acutely to incoming attacks, to threats, and when executing your own attacks. The next haki I want to talk about is armament. Again, this obviously makes your physical attacks with your body and weapons much stronger, but also when you leave yourself open, losing track of body parts, armament haki would allow you to defend yourself. Additionally, armament haki can come from any body part and doesn't have to spread out from somewhere, or it doesn't seem like it has to. So to be able to instantly cover yourself in armament haki for whatever body part is about to be attacked, since you're separated out, you have the potentially one of the best uses of armament haki, being able to focus your haki into whatever piece is being attacked, as it is separate from the rest of your body, and the rest of your body might at that time be in a very safe location. Because of that, you wouldn't actually have to defend that and use haki. So you could focus extreme amounts of armament into very small parts of your body, just making the armament haki itself stronger and making up for the weaknesses of your Bara Bara. Now, combining this with observation, it just amplifies that strength. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the lengths that you could take the Bara Bara Nomi to. So right now, Buggy typically separates around his joints. He cuts off his fingers, he separates his wrists, elbows, arms, knees, hips, etc., and then his body into pieces. However, what if he could go a lot smaller? What if the user of the Bara Bara Nomi could separate themselves down into pieces the size of a penny that he can then coat individually with armament haki and shoot at somebody, causing devastating damage? Or what if he could go smaller than that still? What if he could break down to a molecular size? Now, this is, I think, pushing well beyond what we have seen in the story, but when we first saw Luffy, we did not expect him to blow air into his muscles and then become a flying monkey king. So I think this is actually pretty fair if we're taking these devil fruits to the extreme. Back to it. If the user of the Bara Bara Nomi, maybe our savior, Buggy D. Clown, could separate himself at a molecular level, he would able not to just instantly dodge slashing attacks. He could be able to move his body and avoid most physical attacks, punches, kicks, etc. And on a defensive end, he would be extremely hard to deal damage to, except for maybe large AoE attacks to hit these small pieces. Now, to those, I think he would be quite vulnerable because these small pieces are separate. Individually, they should carry very little strength. However, assembling back together, the strength of the user themselves. So defensively, dodging attacks, not just sword slashes, but most physical hits, and then increasing weakness to some AoE attacks. Now, how would this affect him offensively? Offensively, this would make the user of the Bara Bara Nomi pretty crazy, I think, because if you could separate your body down to a molecular level and then reassemble it anywhere, reassemble your hand inside somebody else's body to then crush an organ, choke them from the inside. Really, the potential of this fruit used in that way is limitless. The ability to capture, the ability to render motionless or kill your opponent is incredibly high. However, this does open you up. This does cause some issues itself. One, it's actually hard enough to keep track of your individual body parts as you just break them apart, as you're keeping track of, say, 10 different body parts flying around, moving independently from your body. That already takes a lot of concentration, skill, and time with your devil fruit. So turning your body into molecules and having millions upon millions, if not billions of molecules that you are individually controlling or even moving as a swarm would be incredibly difficult, take a ridiculous amount of concentration. And even if it was physically possible by the devil fruit itself, it might not be possible for the user. Additionally, those small pieces are incredibly weak and could be destroyed so quickly. Imagine somebody with fire powers on flakes of a body that can be instantly vaporized or destroyed. Anything working like that, the user would go to reassemble themselves and be missing parts of their body, maybe key parts of their body, and they still take that damage. So this could make the Bara Bara user extremely vulnerable, and although exceptionally powerful, extremely vulnerable, and it might not be worth it. Now, I think there's two things to get around this. One, as we originally talked about, was a combination of the peak of the Devil Fruit ability and Haki. If you combine observation Haki with these molecule-sized pieces, you theoretically would be able to control those, bypassing that question. And two, with armament, stop those individual small pieces from being destroyed so easily, so that you aren't immediately susceptible to permanent damage, maybe resulting in death. Little bonuses of combining the two. You would potentially be able to separate that same hand into millions or billions of molecules, reach out, form it into somebody, armamenting the entire thing, because really, you're only covering a hand with armament Haki, assembling it in somebody, and killing them. Or simply just using that to infiltrate somebody's body and the damage it does, killing them as well, having a focus amount of armament Haki anywhere on an individual where they may or may not be using Haki. If it's separated over their body, we know it's weaker, and if it's focused in one spot, you can just attack where they don't have Haki focused, allowing you to penetrate their defenses without leaving yourself open to being defeated. So that is one way of overcoming these major weaknesses and keeping these incredible advantages with this Devil Fruit taken to the next level. The next is potential awakening. Now, if the awakening ended up being the same thing and the same control over separated pieces, but having to do something with their environment, maybe being able to chop and control the world around them, maybe a single target that they touch, this would still be incredible because you would have almost all the same offensive capabilities, being able to move it into somebody, choking them, tearing them apart. But you wouldn't have the vulnerability of it being your own body. So what if those pieces get attacked and destroyed? It's not you. You don't take damage. Just apply that power to another piece and go back on the offensive. So these are two ways that the fruit and the user could potentially make up for those weaknesses. And overall, this is the kind of power that I would expect to see from the Bara Bara Nomi, from the chop fruit, if somebody like Luffy or somebody as clever and creative as him, or maybe just the main character of our story, were to have this Devil Fruit. Maybe if Buggy the Clown was the main character of this story, we'd see him use powers like these. So, tell me what you think. If you think this is a long shot, way past the potential of the Bara Bara Nomi, let me know. If you think this is a cool idea, also let me know, and let me know what fruit you might want to see next. Thank you. Peace. And before we go, remember, if you did like this, like, comment, and subscribe, and join the boys.